It is Wednesday, September the 6th. I am John Pollock, joined as always by Brandon Thurston of trade journal Wrestlenomics, who is here with us, fresh off his tour of the Midwest that took him to Pittsburgh, to Chicago, and back to
Took
Buffalo.
all day to recover. I am now mostly recovered, and I'm ready to talk about the news.
Yes, we're going to get into all of it and Brandon's travels. 2 events, 1 press conference. Maybe he will go into that as well. But a different format today. We don't have a guest on the show, so we do have no shortage of topics that we are going to get into, but we also want to turn it over to you. So if throughout the hour you want to drop in a super chat, you can take us off into any tangent you would like by submitting a question. We will get to it, and we will be monitoring it throughout the hour. So you are free to submit whatever super chats you so desire to get into the mind of Brandon Thurston, and then get my 2 cents as well, or at least a joke at the end of it. Brandon, you are back.
Yes.
It is a huge weekend, or was a huge weekend, for both WWE and AEW. And I think we should start with, well, where do you want to go? Do you want to go in order of Payback to All Out? Tell us about the weekend and what you took out from it being on the ground for both of these shows.
Pittsburgh.
It was a quiet weekend overall, very quiet Saturday afternoon. No alarming press releases that got dropped hours before Collision.
Yeah, as I talked with you guys right after Payback, I rushed back to my hotel room in Pittsburgh. Payback was a pretty good show. The crowd was a little tired for the last 2 matches. Like I said, the cage match with Trish and Becky was very good. Full crowd. The WrestleTix number, do I have any of that information, or do you have that? The press release that they put out for Payback.
This was interesting. So WrestleTix, their final number was 13,014. On the broadcast, Michael Cole announced 14,584, which is our usual like 2,000 or so increase. But then WWE put out a press release on Monday announcing 12,468. Not going with the on-screen quote-unquote entertainment number.
Right. And I asked, is this the number of tickets sold? I asked W, is this the number of tickets sold? Is this the drop count? And I didn't get a response yet. So I'm guessing it's one of those two. It could be tickets distributed. It wouldn't be ridiculous for WrestleTix to be off by like 500 in tickets distributed. But it appears to be a much more honest number than any event that I can think of. I can think of a 2008 WrestleMania where they published what seems to be the paid attendance in a filing in 2008. But that's the only one I can think of. That seems to be as honest.
Are we entering like has the AEW versus WWE war entered the honest with the public period when it comes to attendance figures? Are we getting more of a legitimate number? I mean, WWE here contradicting their own on-screen announcement. I was stunned at this.
I know
someone made a mistake here.
That's a difference of almost 2,000 between their announced Michael Cole attendance and the press release attendance. So
yeah, the WWE Payback press release, it also, featured that viewership was up 36% from the previous Payback record in 2016, which, you're comparing, one being the WWE network of 2016 versus the Peacock subscriber era of today. So whatever those numbers are, will we get to a point where we get hard numbers from WWE in these press releases? Do we get away from percentages?
Probably not, unless there's a real third party collecting data on this like Nielsen someday. And that's not happening in the foreseeable future. They're doing some of that for NFL streaming. That's it at this point.
So that was Payback. It was, overall, I think it was a good show for the company. And business wise, very strong numbers, but a lot of the attention was more so on the results that would come out of All Out, this being their second event in as many weekends. And for this one, we saw WrestleTix with a final number of 9,826 tickets distributed, which would be well above last year. Last year, it was 9,039. However, the difference in gate certainly favors last year's number. Tony Khan estimated around $800,000 for this year's gate. Last year, they did top $1 million for All Out that would have been the Now Arena, correct?
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and this is at the United Center. So I guess higher ticket prices for that event. This is a bigger venue to fill. Yeah.
Pardon the pun.
Right. He said one notable thing from the press conference is that he all but said in a very Tony Khan way. He had to talk around a lot of things. I'm guessing he was referring to, didn't want to say that the Democratic National Convention will be at the United Center in late August. I mean, that's not Labor Day, but that seems to be what he was talking around. He was, sort of jokingly saying things about the Secret Service. Can we say that? He was talking to Raphael Morphy, who's live events executive. So I'm apparently that's going to interfere with AEW's ability to do All In at the United Center next year. So he basically said it's going to be at the Now Arena instead.
And that would also dovetail with the estimated pay-per-view figures. And all that we have gleaned so far was Tony Khan of the belief that they were going to top 100,000 buys, which again, this was the night of the event. So you're largely going off of what your digital numbers would inform you of without getting, I would say, a hard number when it comes to traditional pay-per-view buys that early on. But if you take that at face value and this tops 100,000 buys, first of all, what are you estimating All In has performed at? Do you have
based on Tony's comments alone? He has said that it's going to be either the second or the third highest. So it's going to be below 200,000 All Out 2021, but that probably means it's around 165, something in that neighborhood, to be the second or the third. I think 170 there's a Revolution 2022, I believe, did about that. So it's going to, he's based on his comments, he's saying it's in the high 100,000s. So let's say 165 plus 100 over 2 pay-per-views, that sort of averages out to like 130-ish. So that's, what these pay-per-views in the trailing several have done. So it's pretty heavy ask on the consumer to ask them to spend $50 on consecutive weekends, but you ended up with a result that put you at about where it was going to be if you did these a month apart, I guess, let's say. All In was a special event, though, in terms of being this huge stadium event, which was a real big deal the first time in the UK, and that added a lot of the value that's not going to be repeatable next year when they do this again.
Yeah, it's going to be the repeat of this next year. I think like the All In brand feels very significant coming out of this particular show. But we will see next year, like what that means a year removed. I think there's honestly like this big buzz of what just happened that there feels as though almost like you want to capitalize on this as soon as possible. Like, does this, will the memories of this event transfer over, 6-8 months from now when tickets go on sale and AEW is probably in another phase of where the company is in now. But at least on pay-per-view, I think this would tell you that there is at least enough of an audience willing to buy shows on back-to-back weekends that Tony's desire to create the bank holiday in England and then piggyback off of Labor Day weekend the next weekend was worth the risk, even though it is probably like All Out you did lose what that show would have done on its own without another pay-per-view 7 days prior.
It would have, I imagine if, let's say there was no All In this year and it was just All Out, and this card had a stronger card because the matches that happened at All In could have happened at All Out to some degree, then it probably ends up doing like 140 or something like that, I guess, in the range of what the other pay-per-views have been doing. So yeah. I'll talk about All In attendance. I have some things to share about that.
Let's take a look.
That attendance. So as we know, they announced 81,035 for the paid attendance, and that does, I can't rule out. I mean, Tony Khan and others have said this very matter-of-factly, as if it's obvious and clear to everyone. I can't rule out that it is the highest paid attendance verifiable in wrestling history, right? That's what they're saying. It's probably higher than WrestleMania 32. It's probably higher than WrestleMania 3. I could see WrestleMania 3 being higher, but I've talked enough about that. But I did go through. I've been working
the pro. I love this.
So I've been trying to help Mr. WrestleTix estimate a tickets distributed number for All In, and so I've had to draw numbers on the section numbers onto a lot of these sections to try to figure out what the tickets distributed is, and basically based on trying to estimate what the production kills are here, which is what these black curtains are that we see over here in sort of the end zone area it's probably completely wrong to call something in Wembley Stadium the end zone, right? But anyway,
We just lost a continent with that comment, but that's okay.
but based on this is not the official WrestleTix number that hopefully will be coming out soon. But just based on the production kills that I estimated, I get a number less than 81,000, about 1,000 less, right? Just about 1,000 less, 900 less, I guess, 80,135, and so I have to assume that if this number is correct, and I feel like it's credible, it has to include suites. So I have. People have asked me, have you asked the police yet? Have you asked the London police yet? And I did. And what did they say? I would like to read it. So I asked the London police, and they said, we're the City of London Police. So we cover policing in the square mile, which I had to look up what this spokesperson meant by the square mile, which I guess is like a certain region of downtown London or something. I'm sure UK listeners are yelling at us. And I'd suggest speaking to Wembley Stadium if you have questions about an event they hosted. Okay, so I emailed Wembley Stadium, or actually I emailed the PR agency that represents Wembley Stadium, and they said, as with all events at the venue, Wembley Stadium does not issue attendance figures. This is down to the event owner / promoter. You would need to contact AEW directly. So I've asked AEW, does this include suites? AEW says, yes, this includes suites. And I've asked for a number, still waiting to hear back on that. So that's where we are with, with can we verify or find information to support that this number really is what it is? I mean, AEW telling us a number would be nice, but it's not going to be a third party. Maybe Polestar will eventually come out with a number here. They do have some Wembley Stadium events. Harry Styles at Wembley Stadium you can find in the Polestar data, which is something that we subscribe to and we get information for. So maybe we'll see that number in Polestar, which could include tickets sold, could include a gate. They say it's over 10 million for the gate. So that's where we are, and hopefully WrestleTix will be doing a tickets distributed on that soon. Yeah.
Do you have anything off the top of your head that if WWE were to stage a WrestleMania in Wembley, of how significant of a difference it would be with their staging, or would that just be, it's too hard to estimate, like how many more kills a typical WrestleMania would have in a venue of this size?
I mean, they would probably kill more than, well, I mean, look at this photo that I had up a moment ago.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, Wembley, the stage, if you can see my mouse, the stage is behind the ring. That's where the actual stage was for AEW All In. They killed all this too on the left side of your screen.
Right.
They didn't have to. They killed it because it wasn't going to get filled. I mean, look, they still put probably 80,000 people in this building, but they could have put a lot more if they didn't have to kill these seats over here. And maybe this is where the hard cam was, but anyway, they could have put more people in here. If WWE wanted to do a small stage, sure, they could put more people in here if they had the demand to put it in there. Now, if Wembley Stadium ever hosts a WrestleMania in this era, it's probably going to be a 2-day WrestleMania. Why would they do a 1-day WrestleMania just for the sake of breaking the record? I guess if they really wanted to, they could do that. But with Peacock and with sponsorships, that it probably gives them a lot more space and a lot more media to sell, a lot more ad space to sell if they do 2 days versus 1.
In terms of All Out itself, you being there, I mean, what was the sense being, because you were not at Collision, but you were there for All Out. This was at the United Center, their second night in a row inside of the building. And going into this, there was the curiosity of what would the fan response be towards CM Punk, and watching it on television. Like, they certainly had their moments where, especially when the Young Bucks were out, but overall, like, it came across as though this was not an audience that was showing up to protest or to take over this show. It felt like an audience that was there to see a great wrestling show. They did. And by the end of it, I mean, CM Punk was certainly a major story coming out of the weekend, but I wouldn't say that was the dominant theme if you were tuning into this show on Sunday night, which in another era, it could have been of fan revolt against this, to a very beloved star in his hometown.
Yeah, the era of fan revolt, I guess, ended at the beginning of the pandemic, right? Like, that's the last time I can think of, let's say a post WrestleMania Raw audience getting in there and giving really unwanted reactions. I mean, this obviously the what was it, 8-man tag with the Young Bucks and FTR, that had the strongest presence of the audience being aware that CM Punk is fired, and people acting really strongly, both positive and negatively, towards the Young Bucks, who are really sort of eating it up and like going through some amazing, multi-part spot, and then just boom, posing to the crowd and getting an enormous reaction. That was the strongest part of it. I mean, the crowd in general was hot throughout. I was kind of tired towards like right before the Kenny Omega and Konosuke Takeshita match. I was like, all right, this will probably be like a 20-minute high spot match, and people are going to get tired after this. And they did not. They had a lot more energy than I had. Crowd was hot throughout, which is, having you and I being at Forbidden Door and watching Bryan Danielson and Okada have this match, we're like, oh man, this crowd is just spent. These are two of the greatest wrestlers ever, and this crowd is just they're not with it anymore. But the crowd in Chicago was with it the entire time. The Will Hobbs, the Powerhouse Hobbs and Miro match, with all of the meat chants that came across on TV, right? Like
very much so. Very much so.
That was very much a post Mania Raw kind of reaction. But yeah,
they jumped on it. They've already got a meat T-shirt. That they have out already. I mean, they really jumped on that one.
But in terms of Punk stuff, not really. Just stuff directed towards the Bucks. That's it, really.
We spoke with you on Saturday about sort of the press release itself and the handling of it, but just looking at the way Tony went about addressing the crowd on Saturday, both to the audience at the United Center and then the opening at the beginning of the show. And this can take us into the Collision number, which I think was a pretty terrible number that they had on Saturday. There was definitely reasons for it, but it was lower than even I thought it would end up being. And the peak quarter was the beginning. Like, you did have people tuning in, I think, out of curiosity to see how they were going to handle it. But then, after the Danielson return and such, like, it was a big drop, and there was a little spike for the Dennis Rodman quarter. But then continued to go down. And this is maybe will be the only one, but maybe not, where Rampage actually beat Collision by 27,000 viewers.
Right. I'm going to get the one of these images on the screen here. So it started with 472,000 viewers. So just under 500,000, and it ended with almost half of that viewership left. In the demo, it did fall in half. It's going to work. There we go. So there's a 2-minute overrun where the viewership did climb back up, but most of these quarters, from quarter to quarter, there's double digits of percent of viewership that fell away here. This quarter in the middle must be it is the Dennis Rodman quarter where the viewership noticeably increased. And I've got my dashed lines here. As you can see, as the show wore on in the last 2 quarters, the total viewership fell below the normal trend of the demo viewership. To give you an idea of where this show usually performs and how it performed on this night. I've never seen, I can't think of a quarter-hour trend that I've seen. And I haven't seen WWE, beyond the last couple of years, but I've seen all of the AEW quarters in its entire history. And I can't think of a show that where viewership descended to this degree. I think this quarter, hour 1, is a lot stronger, I think, because of the news of Punk's firing and people being curious to check out how this was going to be addressed. They got their answer in the first couple of minutes, and they could tune out after that if they wanted to. And there's plenty of other interesting stuff to watch, including Payback, including college football and baseball as well.
Yeah, there were 3 college football games going on ABC, CBS, and NBC, and then Major League Baseball on Fox. So I think all told, you had about 8.5 million viewers between those 4 games. But then Payback on top of it, which this was not SummerSlam. It was Payback. But I mean, I'm curious, just
it's probably as weak of a PLE that they're going to go against.
I don't think they're going to have I would think that Fastlane would be comparable to this. Survivor Series will be much bigger than this. And I mean, do you look at this as a combination of the fact that maybe the college football is going to be much more than even we envisioned it was going to be? Or do you attribute this somewhat to just the combination of factors with it is still a WWE event, and that is going to always be the toughest night of the month for Collision?
Yeah, I think WWE makes this much worse than it would be otherwise. I mean, next week will tell us. They'll be going against college football again. I expect it to be up, but I think the PLE definitely hurt it.
They have UFC prelims as well this weekend because they have a card from Australia, so they will be going against that. And then for the rest of the year, they have an NXT show September 30th. They'll go against. The next main roster show is October the 7th, and then they avoid the Saudi Arabia card that you had reported will be November 4th, and then Survivor Series is end of November from Chicago, the Magic City.
So November 4th the show will be earlier in the day.
It'll be in the afternoon. Yes. So they'll avoid that head to head.
I want to say, the day that they did not go head to head with Money in the Bank, but Money in the Bank was earlier in the day, they still had a lower rating than the surrounding weeks.
That's right. That was the Tate Hamilton show, but you're right. It was still down that night. And
so
you can certainly look
wonder
at it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think there's, even when it's not head to head with a WWE show, there is sort of that burnout if you are an audience member. I mentioned this on Sunday's show that like I looked at that All Out card and it looked great on paper, but I definitely felt it on Sunday of just being up Saturday, watching a 3.5 hour wrestling show, and then coming back the next night knowing this is going to be a 4-hour show with a 1-hour pre-show and on top of that, you're asking for people to spend $50. Like there is that burnout for fans of how many nights am I going to dedicate to wrestling? How many hours of my weekend am I going to dedicate to wrestling? And for some, it's just going to be, you're going to pick and choose. And on a weekend where you have multiple pay-per-view events, Collision is an easy miss there among your candidates. If you were going into this weekend stating, I'm going to watch Payback and All Out, but I am not tacking on another 2 hours on Saturday night.
Yeah, and no CM Punk on the Collision show doesn't help either. And no CM Punk on the Collision show, perhaps ever again, doesn't help either for a show that really has to avoid being Rampage in terms of becoming a less and less important show. It really has to rank highly, at least in some ways, at least not. Maybe I'm sure it's going to be tougher in this fall season. And I do have from, courtesy of at Sports TV ratings, if I can show this. Robert Sedman has a Substack that's free where he's posting sports TV ratings every day. And we're looking at the Saturday, I believe now. No, we're looking at the Sunday. Anyway, it's even among just sports telecasts for Saturday. Collision ranked no better than like number 36. Now that includes broadcast, but this is certainly not a top 10 finish for Collision. There has to be some non-sports stuff in there too, I would think. We don't have that yet from Spoiler TV, but it's going to be tough to keep this show strong. Tony did make it pretty clear that Bryan Danielson is going to be involved primarily in Collision going forward because that suits his schedule better. But it's got to hold up.
How alarming of a number is this for you if you're AEW? Like I don't tend to overreact to 1 week.
It's 1 week. It's bad, but 1 week I wouldn't freak out if it stays this way for weeks and weeks.
Yeah. I think obviously you look at this weekend, and I would think that they're not going to be this low this coming weekend without a WWE show. But there are the natural factors we're looking at. There is no CM Punk. There is college football. Like you cannot just go into it, I think, with just a pat hand at the same time. I feel like this is a show that you need to be monitoring and understanding that this is a show that is going to need that boost immediately. And the competition is going to intensify, but they've known that all summer. So this should not completely, like the CM Punk stuff, you could not necessarily forecast, but the fall season you could.
Yeah, for sure.
So on top of that, from the Collision numbers, is there anything else on the All Out front that you wanted to discuss?
How much of the press conference have you listened to?
Most of it. I saw everything except for Chris Statlander and most of the Adam Cole portion, but everything else I did see.
We got a Jacksonville Jaguars question in there. Did you catch that?
Oh, well,
he's being asked if the Jaguars are leaving Jacksonville, which I thought was
did he say yes? Did he break news that yes,
no,
we're leaving Jacksonville, and I'm breaking it at the All Out press conference?
He did start to talk about how great the Jaguars are though, and how great the team is.
Did you ask that?
No, I did not ask that. Not many questions about Punk here. I think only coming from Nick Hausman and me. I was really hoping that, this is one of the biggest stories of the year. One of the biggest, the biggest star in AEW by a fair stretch just got fired for cause, in pretty dramatic circumstances, and only a couple questions that dared to mention CM Punk.
Were you surprised that there was no further information beyond? I mean, Tony was this was a very, it was a very strongly worded statement that they put out and that he vocalized in the United Center. And I was somewhat curious to see if it would be, if he would go into any level of detail, but it became pretty obvious from you and Nick's questions that this was a subject he was not going to address. I mean, Nick Houseman's follow up was just ignored when it came to what he learned from the CM Punk situation. I mean, I think he was being the usual Tony Khan, very careful when it comes to these stories, which was a departure from what we saw the night before, where he was very detailed when it came to the level of what went into this decision.
Yeah, the press conference had an unusual dynamic in that Tony is always sitting next to talent, which he was on this occasion. And media were asking questions, and often, rather than asking the talent a question, they asked Tony a question, which was unusual. But none of those questions, or most of those questions, were not about the Punk situation or anything like that. And I don't know, I can't read anybody's mind, but it's almost like people wanted to ask the question, but weren't quite getting there. I have the sense, though, that if more people were willing to ask those questions, it would be easier to get momentum and for more questions to be asked, and to maybe get more color, get more detail on the story. I had a list of, I was talking to you beforehand, and I had a list of 10 questions ready to ask him, and we got 2 or 3 of them.
Yeah, I mean, the top ones were what you asked about. What was the status of Jack Perry, and obviously, is there a no compete element to this firing with cause for Phil Brooks? Which, I mean, inevitably,
he didn't answer it, and I didn't expect him to answer it. But there's other things. I felt that was, we're there to serve fan interests, and the audience interests, and what are they curious about? And I think we have to at least ask it, even if it feels pretty likely that he's gonna not want to get into it.
You have to still ask. You still have to ask it, even if you're not expecting an answer. It's okay, there's a 95% chance you don't get an answer, but there's a 100% chance you're not going to get it if you don't ask. That's kind of my thinking of it all. And we have seen, I mean, several reports have come out. I think Justin Barrasso at SI.com mentioning this, that, from the Punk camp, it sounds like there will be the time and day that CM Punk airs out his side of this, which will be the next chapter in this saga of where things go. And do they escalate? Is there a legal element to this, which I think would be a natural assumption that could be a result here. And I'm sure AEW is very mindful of that. At the same time, they had a very harshly worded description of this, to the point of Tony Khan stating that he felt his life was in danger from this incident that went down. So I think that rebuttal is going to happen, and we will see where this escalates into next. And I think if you are AEW, you want to move on as much you can, but this is not, to me, a book that has closed yet.
Yeah, and one of the questions that I'd be curious to know, and I think you suggested, was that, is there a non-disparagement agreement here between the parties so that they can't say certain things about each other? But yeah, I would expect some sort of interview soon from Punk. I have searched Pacer for Phil Brooks and for All Elite Wrestling this morning. No news to report there. But I mean, just thinking about it, and somebody suggested this to me, that it wouldn't be surprising if he turned up on, let's say, Ariel Helwani's show, and just turn the screws to Tony, who's taking little shots back and forth between himself and Ariel. And Ariel has interviewed Punk before, so there seems to be a relationship there.
Yeah, I mean, he's been on his show many, many times throughout his UFC tenure. I mean, I can't get into his head. I don't know what his thought process is. You also have the precedent of the last time that he did an exit interview, so to speak,
right,
that led to a massive legal issue for him.
I would definitely want to speak with some lawyers before I interviewed CM Punk.
I think you would be wise to do such a thing. Again, so much of this is like you can't get into his head and know what he is thinking. Like based on precedent, he is somebody that I feel when he believes he has been wronged, rightly or you agree or disagree with him, like he wants his side out there, whether it be directly or indirectly. So certainly would not be a surprise at all that suddenly some big statement interview drops from Phil Brooks. But in the short term, like that was always discussed. Like if you cut ties with this individual, it is going to cause its pros and cons for your company. Like in the short term, will this hurt Collision? Probably, but you are also going into a period where I think Collision was going to be hurt regardless. So if you are CM Punk, you can maybe have some solace in that fact that Collision is going to go down without you. And whether Phil Brooks deserves credit or not for his lack of participation on Collision and its numbers going down, I mean, that was almost inevitable. And from this point forward, you look at the options of what you have left. And is Tony Khan just looking to rebuild and build this up with a super deep roster? Or are you looking for short-term fixes of going out there, bringing in someone that just takes everyone's attention away from CM Punk and puts it on someone else? And what the level of rope you have from WBD to, like, do they want to see increases immediately? Is this something where you're playing the long game, or do you need to be changing things around yesterday? I mean, that's part and parcel with working with a broadcaster and what their expectations are.
Yeah, it does feel like the beginning of a new era for AEW. I mean, how much do you think it matters that? I mean, I would argue since early 2022, since Cody left, which was sort of followed by the MJF controversy and him maybe walking out or whatever he did, and then the All Out press conference just after that. I think it's been a valid criticism for the last, whatever that is, year and 9 months, that the most interesting stories surrounding AEW were not on screen, were online and in news reporting. And what is the drama of the day in AEW? That is, they're able to now move past that, maybe, right? But probably. And does that make that is a healthy thing, I suppose, for AEW, in terms of being able to produce programming that can be the main feature? Or obviously Punk being out of the way is going to hurt them, at least in the short term. They're going to lose their biggest star. But does it matter that much that the biggest stories might actually be the things that are happening in the ring rather than people wondering about what's happening backstage? Does that matter that much to the economics of their business?
I think from the optics, and again, there's going to be fans that disagree with the decision by Tony Khan to terminate CM Punk, but I think to a broad portion of the audience, at least optically, it feels like the connective issue in CM Punk from all these different stories is removed from the situation. Now, whether that, do people have their head buried in the sand that this is all of a sudden going to be a locker room that is all in harmony with one another? I think that's a bit of a stretch to imagine in any wrestling locker room that that's going to occur. But I think from a fan perspective, that there is the belief of this is the company officially moving on, because there has been this cloud over the company for minimum 1 year. And you could go back further, as you mentioned, that this has been just this thing that has dragged on. And whenever there's been the thought that they're moving past it, something else inevitably pops up, and it's constantly taking attention away from what you're drawing money from. Like, this is not selling tickets. This is not selling pay-per-views. This was not putting any kind of positive, this was not drawing money in any way. It was attention that I think to some people, any attention is great attention, but I think this would be an example of that not being the case. I don't think this enhanced AEW's product in any way, and I think it diminished it to many people.
And I think it's coincided with at least Tony's media approach of being more guarded and more evasive in press conferences and in interviews, because there's been questions that he doesn't want to address and get into, and I think that really started around early 2022 or so.
Let's go to one super chat here. We have a few. John Kleinchester: if AEW pay-per-views go to Max, would that benefit AEW financially against Bleacher Report and traditional pay-per-view, or is it more advantageous because of the built-in Max audience? I mean, ultimately, we would have to know what the dollar figure is that they are getting for these pay-per-views. And if it, like for WWE, their move to Peacock, it was very advantageous for them given the amount that they are now guaranteed. Similar to UFC, where like there was a reason they eliminated the risk of having to create major attractions every single month to get people to buy on pay-per-view when you have a guaranteed amount that no matter what your card is, you're going to get. And I mean, without knowing what the dollar figure is,
yeah, I mean, if you're AEW, you have to say, well, I need enough money to justify that, to justify this exact question, right? Maybe they can do 12 pay-per-views a year, and just like WWE does, but it has to be, they have to make the deal from WBD for that has to be well in excess of what they would make on traditional pay-per-view alone, which was like, what is that? That's because I have this here. I think, all in, if it drew 165,000 buys, it generated around $4 million in pay-per-view revenue, just pay-per-view revenue. So that's on the high end, right? So I don't know. It's got to be maybe approaching like, at least $50 million, maybe $100 million, something like that. So if they can pay them enough, yeah. And I think there's a great value in having those events on streaming that we've seen in the case of WWE being on Peacock. With those events on Peacock, I think that's really coincided with the mid 2021, I would say, turnaround or end of the attrition of fan interest. And I think it's, in large part because people were able to watch those pay-per-views to a degree that they didn't in the past, because Peacock was, not something that they had to pay $9.99 for, but something that maybe it came with their cable package, or they want to watch The Office or whatever it is, and so they had Peacock in their homes, and so they were just more engaged with the product, and maybe that led to downstream interest as well. And I think we saw that in the early days of the W Network, where you basically, I don't know, doubled, something like that. You multiplied your pay-per-view audience, and that led to, I think, downstream engagement. We certainly saw an increase in ticket sales and merchandise sales from 2014, 15, 16.
We have one here from Bruce Lord. With no formal New Japan branding on Wrestle Dream, do you anticipate cooperation with other Japanese promotions, maybe New Japan talent that are not booked on the Core Q and Hall show? So yes, New Japan has a Road to Destruction show the same day as this Wrestle Dream card on October 1st in Seattle. One of the major names not booked on that New Japan show is Will Ospreay. So you could, in theory, book him on that day on October the 1st. And the reasoning for this is that this is designed as a tribute show to Antonio Inoki on the anniversary of his death last year. But you would think, unless New Japan is going to remove talent that has already been advertised for that Core Q and Hall show, that the New Japan talent would be limited in terms of who you would have access to. But maybe this relationship is enough that Geto would yank some talent and be a good partner.
And that's a big travel period too, right? I'm trying to look at that's October 1st, right? That date is for?
Yes, a Sunday night pay-per-view.
And they have October 3rd is the next day on the tour, and September 30th also in Cork and all. So what I'm saying is to go to Japan, you're taking out more than just one, or to go to the US is taking out more than one day, even though it is on the West Coast in Seattle. Yeah, I almost wonder if they're just going to do Will Ospreay and Shibata and say, yeah, we've got some New Japan presence here.
I'd also wonder too of like how many of those New Japan performers would be like difference makers for a pay-per-view, and they would be, your upper 5% of talent. That, I mean, I don't think New Japan would want to take all of them out and you just fill this with a, whoever it is, your Okada, a Tanahashi, a Shingo Takagi, like that level. And beyond that, I mean, I don't think, making sure you get a Hiroki Goto is going to be your big difference maker, as opposed to the roster that you have, plus an Ospreay, plus maybe one other big talent. I don't think this has to be a great number of performers you need either from New Japan.
They do have matches announced. I'm looking at the October 1st.
Yeah, they have the whole card listed. So it would require them to like take away from like what is advertised, which is very un-New Japan like.
So Okada is in a 6-man. Naito is in that 6-man. Yeah, Tanahashi is in a tag match. Just looking at the biggest names here. But yeah,
would you guys like Toru Yano in Seattle?
I think Toru Yano's
make that happen
too.
for you. What do you think about just the idea of a Sunday night pay-per-view? And this is going against it's a big Sunday night game, I believe, that they are up against that night, if I'm not mistaken. It might even be the Bills playing. I don't know. But nonetheless, a Sunday night pay-per-view. This has been, during football season, they have avoided Sunday nights, but this will be one where they do test the waters in the fall season.
Yeah, I mean,
and also coming so close, like maybe we shouldn't be too concerned about the proximity after seeing what All Out did that 4 weeks later.
Chiefs and Jets it's going against.
Okay, so that's a sizable game. Chris Gullo will confirm with us.
Yeah, Aaron Rodgers is moved to the Jets, and in Buffalo, we're not going to be able to watch it on ESPN because of this charter Spectrum. Spectrum is serves cable for the Buffalo area, and I think a lot of New York, and I'm pretty sure most of the New York City area too.
This is almost 15 million cable subscribers that this carriage conflict is affecting. And based on my my podcasts, you would think like a war is breaking out, because it is the only thing that is being discussed on every single show, this battle between Disney and Charter. But I mean, from a wrestling standpoint, I mean, it's unlikely, I would say, that this is resolved by Monday, which will affect people being able to watch Monday Night Football for the first game of the season.
Right. So, and that's what is the first? Is the first Monday Night Football? It's not
next Monday.
Week. That's right. Oh yeah, so it is next Monday. Yeah, probably not. And I would think, it's still going to take Monday Night Football still across the rest of the country. What, 15 million out of 70 million or so homes that's what the ESPN is in. So it's going to take some of the edge off, but it's still going to take a big hit on Raw, I would think. But the bigger economic consequences might be that, I know John O'Rand has said, they'll probably come to a deal eventually, not in a week from now, but eventually. But the talk is that Charter may withdraw how involved it is in cable television, which could ultimately give all the networks less money, and therefore less money that they can spend on content, including the most expensive content, live sports rights, which encompasses WWE and AEW. So I don't know if is that a setup for what Brandon Ross was talking about this week.
Well, Brandon Ross, former guest of Pollock and Thurston, had this report on through LightShed Partners, and wrote that WWE and Endeavor investors have been laser focused on PFL for the past several days. The fear of Saudi money continues to weigh on the stocks. However, the event path from here should refocus investors. In addition to the TKO deal closing in the next few weeks, we believe that WWE has been getting close to the goal line on deals for both Raw and SmackDown. So whenever you're getting the deep football analogies for business deals, that's when you know the perk up.
Almost in the end zone.
We have said that we believe Raw and NXT would return to NBC Universal. We suspect that the SmackDown negotiations are with Amazon or Disney, though we are less certain on the who in that deal. It is not Fox. Sounds pretty definitive. The big question is whether the Charter-Disney dispute will interrupt these deals. As we wrote this morning, the future of sports rights is now uncertain, with the multi-channel bundle on the brink of collapse. Will traditional media companies be able to manage a more sudden transition to streaming? NBCU must be worried about its next deal with Charter, even as it could certainly simulcast on Peacock. If Disney is the frontrunner for SmackDown, could they even complete a deal? If it is Amazon, should they wait, given all sports rights could reprice? These are the questions most relevant to TKO's future at the moment.
Yeah, and we still have the notion out there that, well, maybe none of this, at least the SmackDown part of this, is going to get done until the NBA rights are done. And then the networks know how much money they have to work with. They know the time slots that they still have available that they need to fill. And I don't know off the top of my head when the negotiating windows for NBA end, but it's going to be close to SmackDown. SmackDown's Fox deal actually expiring, I would think, which is about a year from now, right? So the end of this month will be the end of September, and it expires at the end of September 2024. So it could go that long, and by which time, and maybe by even a week or two from now, the merger will be completed, and then Ari Emanuel can get in there with Nick Khan and maybe make a deal. But if it goes to Disney, then the prevailing wisdom is it would be on FX SmackDown.
And suddenly a lot of wrestling fans are going to be worried about this carriage dispute. Where am I going to get my SmackDown?
Well, that'll be a year from now. I'm sure that'll be
I
settled
don't
by
think
then.
this will be ongoing at that point.
For Prime Video, I still think it's early to go to Prime Video, to put one of your flagship shows strictly on streaming, unless there's some sort of deal that can be worked out so that there's a simulcast, at least for the early part of any deal like that. Let's say it's a 5-year deal. I would be real hesitant if I'm WWE to put SmackDown on a platform that's not going to reach, I don't know. Now I say reach, but Prime Video is in like 80 million homes or something like that, because people actually subscribe to Prime for all sorts of reasons. They may or may not actually use the Prime Video service. But you look at what the NFL did when Thursday Night Football went exclusive to Prime Video, and it's doing, in the tens of millions of viewers, but it's a drop off from what it was doing when it was on Fox, right? So it's going to do lower viewership. You're going to end up with a SmackDown that's currently doing, something like 2.5 million viewers sometimes, is going to fall to, I don't know what, fall in half maybe. And think of the downstream effects that might have. So it feels early, unless the money is going to be enormous, or unless there's some sort of partnership that can be made with a traditional TV network. And Amazon doesn't own any of them, obviously. So it would have to be with, somebody who may be viewed as a competitor, which makes it seem less likely to me.
The other part of that story was regarding the investment with a Saudi Arabian group that has now acquired a reported 10% stake in the Professional Fighters League. And I did not expect this to be the kind of impact on the WWE stock. But that was certainly the thinking last week. Like, we saw this WWE stock take a major hit. And while it's recovered somewhat, it is not fully recovered. It's trading at about $100 now. And I think traded as low as around 95-ish last week. And this was, at a period, it was trading at around $115. So it has seen some extreme volatility over the last week. And that was the prime factor, was this investment and the idea of WWE being tied with the UFC through this soon to be finalized merger, and that this Saudi Arabian investment would signal kind of their entry point into mixed martial arts and disrupting the UFC's business. That obviously is Wall Street was concerned enough about how this impacts WWE.
Yeah. So PFL, it airs on ESPN, right? Is this an extra $100 million to the PFL? Does that make it a big competitor now for UFC? Is this a reasonable reaction to the stock price?
I don't think it was a reasonable reaction. I thought this was actually a pretty great overreaction. As we've discussed on the show, I think the involvement of the progression of the antitrust suit, to me, is way more alarming. Like, they have now set a trial date for next April, which, I mean, still there is the appeal process that UFC is going through the Ninth Circuit Court over. But there's a potential trial, and that could greatly disrupt UFC's business, and not to mention the treble damages that they could be facing, which goes into the multi-billions if they're found guilty.
And I read a quote from Dana White the other day where he called these other MMA organizations charity organizations. So
yes, yeah. So you have one side arguing that there's plenty of competition in the MMA space. UFC is just one of many, and then Dana White is just saying the complete opposite. So there you have Exhibit A, Dana White. But I mean, the PFL, like, they've been around for a number of years, and it's not as though they have not been enticing when it comes to like the way they are structured. It's through these tournament formats where if you go through their regular season and playoffs, and this accounts to about 4 fights per year, and you win, there's $1 million prize at the end, which is sizable money for mixed martial arts. And it's not as though we have seen this giant flow of even mid-level fighters. Like, PFL have signed some ex-UFC fighters, but it's not been some sea change. It's not like they've interrupted the UFC's market cap in any significant way. They tried one pay-per-view last year and it bombed. And, they certainly have much more capital now. So it's not nothing. But to me, it's unproven. And I would say, like, this level of reaction, I just thought was a way reaction in terms of what this means. And PFL is so much further behind than the comparable of an AEW to a WWE. I mean, PFL it could not dream of doing 100,000 buys on pay-per-view. Not at this juncture.
Now, on Friday, Front Office Sports reported that there's a possible merger being discussed between Bellator and PFL. I have it here. So Bellator is owned by Paramount, which is the organization that owns CBS and the former Viacom networks. They reported that the Professional Fighters League is in talks to purchase competitor Bellator MMA from Paramount. Two sources with knowledge of the discussions told Front Office Sports. Bellator is valued at as much as $500 million in the deal, which I think this is what motivated the Dana White comment to say that this is ridiculous, that it's worth $500 million. The transaction would be primarily in cash, with Paramount receiving some equity in PFL. So if those two companies were to combine, does that then present a real competitor to UFC that justifies the action that we're seeing in the stock?
To me, the value of Bellator is like they have some excellent fighters on their roster, but in terms of just buying the company, and if that is like the rumored valuation of Bellator, I mean, that seems awfully high to me of what Bellator is. Again, like Bellator is on Showtime at the moment. Their viewership has dropped dramatically since leaving what was Spike TV years ago.
The Paramount Network, yeah.
And the Paramount Network. So they're on Showtime. They have not been able to, become a pay-per-view entity. But they have some great fighters on their roster, and that's where the value is. But I look at this and I still see this as it's a well-funded competitor to the UFC. But I think it's like there's just such a gulf between this and the UFC that the perfect example of this was a few weeks ago. And this was when like Francis Ngannou has both a deal to fight Tyson Fury this year, and he's also got a PFL contract to do an MMA fight and plans to do that next year. And part of his negotiation with PFL was that his opponent, whoever they sign, which in theory would be their next foray into pay-per-view, his opponent would be paid at least $2 million. And Derek Lewis, who's a very popular UFC heavyweight, his deal was up with the UFC. And everyone looked at this like, this guy's timing is perfect. He could be the ideal candidate to score a giant payday with PFL. And he just quietly resigned with the UFC for an 8-fight deal. And he's back with the UFC. So it's like the idea of even having this giant purse at the end of things to go to PFL, it's not just a given that these fighters want to leave the UFC and still look at it as the best path for their career, even if it is less paying. And I just feel like there is so much built in among like the UFC is just so embedded with many of these fighters of like, this is the major leagues of MMA, and UFC, they've not been able to need to upset their pay structure. And the thing that threatens that more, it's not money from Saudi Arabia. It is this antitrust case that might force them to have to change contract language and the level of restrictions that they have. So I would just be paying a lot more attention to the antitrust suit than the PFL, which to me is
we saw no negative reaction to Endeavor or WWE when the antitrust suit news came out.
No. And maybe that changes when, like a trial date starts looming. And there's also going to be another discovery period later this fall where probably a lot more is going to come out. But yeah, thus far, the antitrust suit has had no impact on Endeavor stock or WWE's for that matter.
Yeah, I'm always mystified at what really moves the stock. I wonder if it's, I imagine what moves the stock are actions from financial institutions and reports from equity analysts who I think know what they're doing. But then you see stuff like this where like, I wonder if they just, see PIF and say, wow, Saudi money, they understand what that means. And that causes a reaction.
I think that's it, Brandon. This one totally caught me off guard, like completely. And I think it's just that, like you can look on paper and I can see how they draw this conclusion. But to me, it's not been borne out with reality of like, there's so much more. Like 2 years from now, maybe I'm proven incorrect, but I just don't see it right now that PFL is suddenly this giant player in this industry that's going to eat into the UFC's dominance over the market. The antitrust suit, I can very much see that being a major impact on the UFC's business and conversely WWE's as well, because of the implications of that. And amazingly, with the antitrust suit at the level it's at and so many parallels to WWE, that has appeared not any kind of factor when it comes to approving of this merger. That looks like it has just gone through a very easy process, and it's largely rubber stamped, and everyone expects a approval any week now.
Yeah. So W might be a deal then. That's what I'm hearing, at $100 a share.
Might be in fact. A few other news and notes that we wanted to get into here. Cardiff, Wales. What was the going rate for Clash at the Castle last September? How much did it cost for a foreign country to land a WWE premium live event, and probably insight into what WWE would want for an event in London? Probably a lot more for a WrestleMania.
Yeah. So this is like old news that nobody noticed until about a week ago, because in April, way back in April, the Welsh government put out a press release that said, do I have the quote here? WWE's Clash at the Castle event in Cardiff in 2022 delivered a massive 10-to-1 return on investment by channeling 21.8 million pounds back into the Welsh economy. So you can do the math there, and so they're saying this did a 10-to-1 return. Well, they're not. It did, but they're putting the math out here. 10-to-1 return on 21.8 million pounds. So just divide that by 10, and you get 2.18 million pounds, which in US dollars is 2.8 million US dollars. So that's looks like something. I'm sure there's, this is not specifically correct, and maybe they're just sort of rounding to get to a 10-to-1 ratio, but it gives you an idea of where it was at, is around $3 million US, around 2 million pounds, which sounds right. We know that Puerto Rico, the Puerto Rican local government, paid $1.5 million in cash for Backlash, and I suppose you could say for SmackDown 2 the night before, in addition to a $300,000 in-kind value related to the venue that they ran. So that's close. That's less than $3 million. And this was a stadium event, Clash of the Castle versus an arena event for Backlash. I'm sure WrestleMania has been a bidding situation for years and years. I don't know any numbers for what municipalities have paid for WrestleMania, but we do know Backlash. I don't know what San Antonio paid. They apparently provided some sort of value to WWE for the Royal Rumble. That was the detail that they were allowed to withhold when they brought they made a request to the state attorney general, and they were approved, so they didn't have to release that information because they view it as competitive, that it would allow other municipalities to be able to put in smarter bids, I guess, and could disadvantage San Antonio from getting a winning bid on a WWE event in the future. So 2.2 million pounds. And I think there's questions around like what did that give enough value to the local economy? They're justifying that it did. Look, we got a 10x increase, a 10x return on our value there. And I went back and looked at the pay-per-view itself on Peacock, and you did get, just like you did for Backlash, you did get 2 tourism ads, I guess, and one of which was ended with Michael Cole and Byron Saxton and Corey Graves just glowing about what a great time they've been having in Cardiff.
You don't think they did have a glowing time in Cardiff?
Well, they may well have. I mean, they probably don't say that, though, if they're not getting paid lots of money for it.
And of those 2.2 million pounds, that comes with a press conference as well. That's what you get.
There was a press conference after Clash of the Castle, yes, as well as Backlash. International PLEs, I was told, will likely get a press conference, as well as the Big Five: WrestleMania, Royal Rumble, SummerSlam, Survivor Series, and Money in the Bank.
So our next one would be Chicago, I guess, unless they do one in Saudi Arabia.
Right. They do like a pre-press.
That's right.
Event.
They did the pre, like the little
yeah, I mean, they don't
do pep rally.
They don't do a Q&A. Yeah.
All right. A few more super chats have come in. I love these ones. Hello. How much do you see the AEW media rights deal will wind up at? Thank you. Can you just
Give us
cut
a
to the
number.
chase, Brandon? How much are they going to get?
How much
for
is
the
it?
next media rights deal? How much?
I speculated anywhere between 3x and 5x over the average annual value of the current deal. The current deal is worth let's make the math easy. The current deal is worth about 45 million. You know, it's more though now because of Collision. So now I believe it's about 70, right, with Collision, because you're providing an extra weekly 2 hours of content. So times 3 would be 121. No, what's 7 times 3? Yeah, 210. It'd be 210, somewhere between 210 and $350 million average annual value. And I think it's fair to be a little bit more bearish without CM Punk there, because that's, you take away the biggest star, that's going to have an effect on the ratings. So maybe on the lower end of that range. That's right. David Zaslav's favorite wrestler.
Maybe he can now. Zaslav will find maybe it'll
Mr. Zaslav, excuse me.
Mr. Zaslav. His new favorite will be a $1 bill, big bill.
Maybe. Yeah.
Next up is from Lee. Sammy, I assume he means Guevara, unless there is another Guerrero that has made its way onto the AEW roster. He has had backstage fights with Andrade and Eddie. Thunder Rosa says she was bullied by the girls. Does AEW have a wider problem than Punk? Well, that's listen, for the Punk situation, this man was not let go because of one incident with Jack Perry. It was, they deemed they went into an investigation about all of the CM Punk era in AEW and felt at the end of it, this is our unanimous view on him. And I would say that if they made that conclusion regarding CM Punk and a pattern that they were able to put together, I don't believe anyone else would be held to a higher standard than a CM Punk. And that would include a Sammy Guevara, that would include anybody on the roster. So if you're trying to say like there's some double standard here, the double standard would have been finding a way to keep CM Punk by any measure on your roster. And they ultimately cut ties with him. So that would be my thought on the matter. Do you have any thoughts beyond that?
No, I mean, I think a lot of it does come down to leadership, and it's true that there have been other fights and conflicts that have involved other people besides CM Punk. I think some of that is down to the leadership and their ability to do things that deter those things from happening.
Our next question, if SmackDown goes to FX, Disney Plus should be the live simulcast partner, similar to Dancing with the Stars on ABC and Disney Plus. I mean, I would see, I would see like ESPN Plus making the
ESPN Plus. Maybe, I don't know if Hulu wants to do live programming. I know they're doing a virtual MVPD with all the channels you can get there. But yeah, ESPN Plus makes the most sense, I suppose. Especially if you probably want that to be a player in the PLE and library rights in the next round too.
Mm-hmm. Brace for it, wrestling fans. The big fear.
You got to remember, the Disney brand is super family friendly, and they want to keep anything that's got inherent violence like WWE away from that, I would think.
And the last super chat from Jake Alinar. What's next in the ongoing MLW WWE lawsuit? My understanding is like they're into like a discovery period at the moment, and it remains to be seen like what is the next what's the next action that comes out of this. But when you're into discovery, there certainly could be some very interesting findings.
Yeah, I think they're into discovery, which I think involves making lots of requests to each other. We did see that one filing where Live Nation, which is the parent company of Ticketmaster, was objecting to having to cooperate with a subpoena because MLW, in their view, MLW wanted information that was too broad. That happened on around August 7th. I tweeted about it. There is a schedule published. Let's see here. They have is there anything that soon? Next year, June 17th, 2024, they have a joint trial setting conference statement. I don't know of any other deadlines, but yeah, discovery is ongoing, and I assume there'll be more filings over the months that might make reference and might use what they find in discovery as exhibits in other arguments that are made.
And reveal them on their next Fight Plus special.
I guess they'll get my buy if they do that.
That could be the way you bring out all of this information in a nice orderly fashion. Before we wrap things up, Brandon, are there any other things that you wanted to hit on before we call it a day?
I don't think so. I think that accomplishes everything on the list that I sent you this morning.
Yeah, Brandon and I I sent him a list of topics, and then later I had seen that he had already sent me a detailed list of topics, and there was a lot of crossover. I think we're very much in simpatico now.
Virtually the same. I guess we could really quickly. New Japan. We know how much money New Japan generated in terms of revenue for the fiscal year of the recently ended fiscal year. The 12 months ending June 2023, they made $36 million in revenue. New Japan did, according to Bushiroad's filings. They made a slim profit of operating income of 1.6 million. Now they've reported in the past net income. So net income is after taxes and depreciation, amortization, all that stuff. So they might have actually not made money on New Japan this year. I don't know, but revenue has recovered somewhat, right? It's not at the peak level in 2019 where they made $37 million, but it's pretty close. Stardom, I don't know if I have the numbers here, but Stardom, while it made a fraction of that revenue, which is under Bushiroad also, was actually more profitable than New Japan was in the same period. So interesting, bit of information there that Stardom's doing well enough to be quite profitable.
It also tells you how, when you look at the pandemic period for the columns there ending July of 2020, of how running 2 nights at Wrestle Kingdom likely got them through, because they were running no shows during the pandemic. They were still able to squeeze out a profit for those first 6 months, for the fiscal year, but that including the first couple of months of the pandemic. And then the following year, which would represent all pandemic, they made nothing, but they also lost nothing.
Yeah. So Stardom is under a segment called Bushiroad Fight, which people who I trust to know these things better than I do say that it's maybe not entirely Stardom, but it's probably mostly Stardom. There's not that much else in that segment. So the Bushiroad Fight segment recorded $10.5 million in revenue in that year and $1.72 million in operating income. So just a hair above New Japan in operating income. And $10.5 million. So you think about that in like US wrestling terms, that's like, that's a fifth of a Saudi Arabia event for WWE. Just to give you an idea how much bigger the major US wrestling companies, especially WWE, are than this one. In a couple months, I guess you could say, or maybe less than that, in a month, right? WWE makes more money than New Japan does all year.
So there you have it. That Saudi Arabian money coming for pro wrestling. Maybe they're going to find their next competitor for WWE that they will get involved with at the ground level, and then cause the stock to just nosedive once again.
Yeah, I've joked about this in the past, but like for the money that the PIF is spending on WWE events, they really could have. It's probably similar to what the Khan family is invested in AEW.
I would certainly look at the fact that, they were, reportedly a player when it came to attempting to buy WWE. And do they just view this as like, this is the brand, this is the Kleenex of professional wrestling, versus a desire to have ownership of a pro wrestling company? Because yes, you would certainly have to find a talent and infrastructure to do so, but the startup cost would not be the hindrance that it would be for so many other people, such as.
Some thing is they did Live Golf from scratch. But they definitely do want to be associated with this, this legacy American entertainment brand
that's already embedded into the culture. I think that's a huge part about being involved with WWE for them. But there you go. A fun format today. Thank you to everybody for the super chats. We got through a lot of topics. Next week, we will be back, guest pending. So look out for that with our updates. We are working on several guests over next week. So we will keep you appraised of all of that. But Brandon will be back this coming Sunday with Wrestlenomics Radio. Sunday morning, 11 a.m. Eastern, patreon.com/Wrestlenomics. You can go catch their one free show of the month from this past week, live from the airport, as Brandon literally boarding his flight as he is rounding up charts and breaking.
I almost didn't make it. I like pulled out the app on my phone to get on the flight, and I was like, why can't I get the QR code to load? And I'm talking to the guy at the gate, and he's like, I'm like, what am I doing wrong here? And he's like, oh, you didn't pre-check in, so we figured you weren't going to come on the flight, so we scratched you off. You got to go talk to her. But they were helpful and got me on the plane pretty quickly.
Man, you would have been all out of luck. But he did make the plane, and he brought you a free show this past Sunday. But you're back this weekend, and you can check out all of that at patreon.com/Wrestlenomics. Do you think CM Punk will still be a big topic by Sunday?
Less so, but I'm sure he'll rekindle his presence.
The main character in professional wrestling, without a doubt. We are back, myself and Wei Ting, tonight, 10 Eastern. We'll be here on the Post YouTube channel with Rewinded Dynamite after tonight's show from Indianapolis, Indiana. So we'll be going through that. And if you are so interested, on Thursday at postwrestlingcafe.com, Wei and I are doing a review of UFC 200 from July of 2016. Brock Lesnar's one-night return to the UFC, where everyone thought he had turned back the clock. And then after a pair of pre-fight drug test results came in, it was not as happy of a comeback for Brock Lesnar. But coming out of that, we learned that part-timers in WWE not subject to the wellness policy. So we will go into all of our UFC 200 coverage, which Wei and I covered in Las Vegas that week. So we will recount our time in the scorching Las Vegas heat, where it was one of the crazier fight weeks with John Jones being pulled from the card, Brock Lesnar. It was a wild week. Three straight nights of UFC.
I emailed the New York State Athletic Commission and asked them, hey, look, he just, tested positive for whatever, right? He failed a drug test. I think it was like the foot cream or something was his reasoning. But, this happened in Las Vegas. Are you in New York, where he's going to wrestle in Brooklyn for SummerSlam? Are you going to acknowledge this suspension? And they were like, no. Long story short, it's up to, I think they said it's up to WWE or something.
Yeah, it's in New York. The promoters have to be licensed, but it is a commission state. And as we saw with GCW last year, they can be very vigorous when it comes to licensing professional wrestling events. But when it came to Brock Lesnar, they were they were okay with letting it play out. But we'll talk about that more. So thanks to everyone for joining us. That is going to wrap up Pollock and Thurston. Have a great week.